In this video, we're going to tie a variation of the popular Redfish Crack pattern. It's a variation by Sightcast Fly Fishing company that sells some really nice fly tying materials. And this is the version they call their Redfish Cracklin. It really moves a lot of water, and you can vary the weight with the different size eyes and give it a different sink rate for different depths of water. It's a really great and proven redfish fly. So let's get started. The hook I'm using is a size 2 Mustad 34007 saltwater hook, but pretty much any saltwater hook in size 2 or 4 will work just fine. And I'm using 140 denier ultra thread in fluorescent pink, and I get my thread started behind the hook eye and create about a 1/4 inch thread base, and then leave it hanging about at 1.5 to 2 eye lengths back. The eyes I'm using are double pupil dumbbell eyes from Hairline, and to get consistent placement on these, I like to place one end of the eye in the hook eye and then tie it in where the eye hits the hook shank in the back. And my thread's a little bit too far back, so I'm going to move it forward just a bit, and I'm going to tie in at that point. Make a few diagonal wraps. This helps me get a nice consistent placement of my hook eye. A few diagonal wraps one direction, few diagonal wraps in the other direction, then back in the other direction. And then I like to do what I call stirrup wraps, over the top of the eye and under the hook, over the top of the eye and under the hook. And that really helps secure it down. And then make some horizontal wraps over the top of the hook shank and under the eye. And that really secures those eyes quite well. Now, you can add a little bit of super glue there if you like, but that's actually fine there. And I'm going to move my thread back to about the hook barb, because we're going to tie a hot spot deep in the bend of this hook. And I'm using petite Estaz for that hot spot, and this is fluorescent pink. And at this point, I give my thread a little counterclockwise twist to make sure it stays untwisted, and then tie that Estaz down deep into the bend of the hook, and then bring my thread back forward to about that hook barb. Now, to keep the thread out of the way while I wrap this, I'm going to lay my thread over the eye, and then I'll make 3 to 4, no more than that, wraps of this pink Estaz. And that's 3, and I think that's enough. And I'll tie down with a couple of wraps behind the Estaz, then a couple of wraps in front of the Estaz. You don't want to bring the Estaz up on to the top of the shaft of the hook. You want it to be just below the shaft of the hook there. And at this point, to tie our tail in, we'll bring our thread forward to about the hook point. Now, the tail on this fly is made with cream colored craft fur, and a tip that I found out that I like to use to ensure consistency and the proper amount of craft fur is I like to, instead of actually just cutting the fur directly from the backing, I like to cut the backing in consistent rectangles. For this fly, about a 3/4 inch square works just fine, and this ensures that I have the same amount of craft fur for each fly, and that it's about the right amount. And I've cut this up to about 3 inches in length, and I'll just tie that down above the hook point and wrap back to the Estaz, and then let's go forward and get some of that. Alright, now there we go, and I'm going to leave my thread again at about the hook point. Now, we want vertical bars on this shrimp imitation pattern, so while we don't have any other materials in the way, I'm going to go ahead and take my brown Sharpie and make 3 vertical bars. Spacing, size, none of that's really critical, but it's much easier to do this barring now than later when we have all those other materials in the way. Now, our next material, we want legs on the fly, and as I said earlier in the intro, most of the materials for this fly are from Sightcast Fly Fishing, and these are their marsh legs, and I'll have a description in the video description of all the materials down below the video. And I wrap them under, the way I like to tie them in anyways, I wrap them under the hook shank, and then pull them to the rear and take a few loose wraps, then just pull them down on either side of the hook, and then just tie them down, making sure they're running down each side of the hook. Kind of adjust them just a little bit, and there we go. Now, to keep all this out of the way, I'm going to move my material clip forward and clip the legs and rest the tail on top of it. Our next material is a bit of flash, and this is a material that Sightcast calls crack wrap. It's a single-sided chenille, and to make a tie-in point, I am going to cut some of those fibers off the very tip and tie this in at our tie-in point near the rear here and pull it back out of the way. And for the sub-body or the underbody of the fly, I'm using more petite Estaz, and this is in light pink. It's opal light pink, and I've, like I did with the hotspot, I've stripped some of those fibers off the end of it so I can just tie down the core. And I move my thread forward to about 1/4 of an inch or so behind the eye. And then I start making touching wraps, close touching wraps with this Estaz. Sweep it back each time so I don't trap many of those fibers down, and wrap it all the way forward to the thread. And make close touching wraps. When I reach the thread, take a couple of wraps behind the Estaz, and then a couple of wraps in front of the Estaz to tie it down, and snip off the excess. And next we just need about 3 wraps of this crack wrap. That gives it enough flash. So I'm going to untwist that a bit. And with those fibers pointing to the rear, I'm going to take 1 wrap and palmer this forward, 2 wraps, 3 wraps, and then tie that in at my tie-in point behind the hook eye. And it does make kind of a mess. Those fibers get trapped, but we're going to pull all of those back out of the way and tie them back. And then trim off any excess there. Our final body material is a Redfish brush. This is a wire core brush that I tie in just behind the eyes. Get those fibers out of the way there. Let me take a couple more wraps, clean that up a bit. Alright, we tie this in just behind the eye, and I've stripped a few of those fibers off that bare wire just so I can have a little easier tie-in point. And I want to sweep all those fibers toward the rear. And now we're going to invert our hook. And I'm going to take 3 or 4 wraps of this. 1, 2, pulling those fibers back each time. If we trap any, we're going 3, and we're going to take 4, 1 more wrap. If we trap any of those fibers, we're going to pick them out here in just a bit. 4. And then I tie that down right behind the eye with several nice wraps behind the brush, a wrap in front, and then I'm going to move the thread to the front of my eye. Now when I trim off the excess on this, I want to leave just a bit of that wire, maybe 1/8 of an inch of that wire or so, and trim that off. And I'm going to reach in there and try to strip out some of those fibers on that wire. So I'll bend that wire. I don't know if you can see it among all those fibers, but that wire is right there above the eyes. I'm going to bend that wire forward. Pull those fibers out of the way. There we go. Bend that wire forward and tie the wire down just in front of the eyes. And I've got a few fibers over the hook eye, which won't hurt anything. Let's trim some of that up though. Alright. Now, my final material Our final piece to tie in is, this is optional, is a weed guard. And I've taken 30-pound mono, and with a pair of just standard pliers I've mashed and bent a tip on it, and I'm going to lay that right on top of that head that I've built. Tie that in. Let's get it up on top. Oh, I've got it over the eye just a bit there. Let me pull it back some. There we go. Tie that just over the top. Take a few wraps of thread behind it, and a few wraps of thread in front of it, trying to avoid pulling many of those fibers as you can into it. And then I'm going to grab my whip finish tool and give it about a 5-turn whip finish. Now, to trim the weed guard, I pull it back toward the point of the hook, and I just rest my scissors against the point of the hook and trim it right there. Now, I'm not going to do this in the video, but then you certainly want to finish this head off with some UV resin or your choice in head cement. And then the final remaining piece is to trim the legs just a hair shorter than the tail. And then let's take a bodkin and pick out any of that brush that we might have trapped down. And there we have it. There is the Redfish Crackling fly. It's a fly that really moves well in the water and pushes a lot of water. And it's a great variation on the Redfish Crack pattern. So I hope you'll give it a try.